Okay. Where are we? Okay, whenever you're ready. Ready? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه يوم الدين. أنت تعلم التعليم وتذكر تذكيرنا في الانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء والهدى والدلالة الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضات قربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. عدد كتب مكتب أبد الآبدين ودهل الداهلين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحليم الحكيم. وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو أضل أو أزن أو أزل أو أظلم أو أجهل أو يجهل عليها. اللهم أغننا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية. يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. طيب, we're picking up where we left off, where the author is talking about the rulings associated with someone leaving Islam. And we talked about the things that can make someone leave Islam. Sometimes someone can leave the religion of Islam because of something they believe. So for example, they believe that, they no longer believe in Allah Ta'ala, or they believe in multiple creators, or they don't believe in the Prophet Sallallahu, or they believe that something that Prophet Sallallahu came with, that there is scholarly consensus about, that every single Muslim knows without having to take a class, such as knowing that the 5 prayers are obligatory, knowing that you can't eat pork, knowing that you can't steal. If they believe the opposite of that, then that also, for example, makes them leave their religion. So sometimes what people can think or what they believe can lead them to leave the religion. And sometimes what they say can make them leave the religion. If they, for example, they say something that mocks the religion, for example, right? They say, for example, they make fun of someone's clothes, like someone's wearing hijab and they make fun of it. Someone has a beard, they make fun of it. Someone makes fun of the prophetic clothing, right? And similarly, if they say something that is hateful towards Islam, right? Or they do something that is mocking Islam, such as, disrespecting the Quran, throwing it in filth or something like that, or, putting it under their foot, na'udhu billah, or something like that. So any of these things can make someone leave the religion of Islam, okay? And he listed a lot throughout the book, and you guys can review it again for your information. But generally, these are beliefs, sayings, or actions. The general principle that he mentioned at the very end of the chapter, right, is what? Is that most of these expressions, in terms of like what he was saying in terms of belief, action, or statements, okay, if they go back to mockery or contempt of Allah, His books, His messengers, His angels, His rights, tamam, the manifestations of His religion, His rulings, His promises, His threats, all of it is disbelief and it's disobedience. So it's haram, and it is also, it can take someone out of the religion of Islam. And today he's going to talk about the rulings related to someone who actually leaves Islam, an apostate, or what in Arabic is called a murtad. He says, فصل في بعض أحكام المرتد يجب على من وقعت منه ردة العود فورا إلى الإسلام بالنطق بالشهادتين والإقلاع عما وقعت به الردة ويجب عليه الندم على ما صدر منه والعزم على أن لا يعود لمثله وقضاء ما فاته من واجبات الشرع في تلك المدة فإن لم يتب وجبت استتابته ولا يقبل منه إلا الإسلام أو القتل أو القتل. Anyone who falls into apostasy, he says, which is what? Disbelieving after being Muslim. Anyone who falls into apostasy is required to return to Islam immediately by uttering the 2 testifications of faith, the shahadatain, and by desisting from whatever caused his apostasy. He is also required to regret what came from him, resolve to not repeat the same thing, and make up whatever religious obligations he missed in the interim. If he does not repent, i.e. if he does not recant his disbelief with the 2 testifications of faith, he is asked to repent, i.e. he is ordered to return to Islam through the 2 testifications. Nothing is accepted from him except Islam or execution. And he says the Caliph executes him according to the conditions mentioned in the longer or more detailed books of fiqh. So, if someone leaves Islam, we studied in the beginning of the book, what? That it's obligatory in every single person, every single individual, it is obligatory upon them to enter Islam. Okay? So if someone leaves Islam for whatever they might leave it for, whether it's for another religion or atheism or whatever it might be, right? If someone leaves Islam, What's obligatory upon them is that they must immediately return to Islam. It's obligatory upon them to return to Islam. How does this return to Islam happen? By pronouncing the two shahadas. Thank you. By pronouncing the two shahadas. Just like someone who is not Muslim becomes Muslim by pronouncing the two shahadas. If someone becomes an apostate, they must re-enter Islam by pronouncing the two shahadas. And the conditions of pronouncing the two shahadas, we covered them earlier in the book, right? We covered them earlier in the book. And the same conditions apply here. They must be articulated verbally, okay? They must be done in Arabic if they're able to pronounce it in Arabic, right? They have to be done sequentially without any long pauses, okay? But note, one of the conditions of entering Islam, there's no condition that it must be done publicly in front of witnesses. So for example, if they were to leave Islam, okay, and they re-enter Islam by articulating the shahadatain, the two shahadas, for example, in salah. Someone, for example, left Islam because something they believed or something they said, right? If they just start praying again, in every prayer there's what? There's two shahadas, right? You said two shahadas in the last sitting of tashahhud, for example, right? Before the salams, right? There's a shahadatain. So, or if they were to do the adhan or respond to the adhan or just say it sometime, okay, even if it's in front of no one. In any case, as long as they said the two shahadas, whether it's by themselves or as part of worship, it's considered to bring their return to Islam. Okay? Yes. So he's asking, would they have to make that prayer up because they don't have valid wudu? Technically, yes. Technically, I guess, yes. Sorry? The prayer that they prayed, that's their re-entrance into Islam. Yeah. So he's saying anyone who falls into apostasy, tamam, is required to return to Islam immediately by uttering the two testifications of faith and by desisting from whatever caused his apostasy. So whatever they did that caused their apostasy, remember that it's haram, right? And what's obligatory upon any Muslim is that whenever they perform anything haram, you stop doing it immediately. And what do? You perform tawbah. You perform tawbah. And that's the next paragraph. He is also required to regret what came from him. Resolve to not repeat the same thing. Tamam? Those two things are conditions for tawbah. Those two things are conditions for tawbah. So a condition of tawbah from any sin is to stop doing it. Tamam? To ask Allah for forgiveness and to resolve or make an intention to never do it again. So so they must stop what they did that led them to become a disbeliever. So if they believe something specific, they have to get rid of that belief. If they did something specific, they have to stop doing it. If they said something specific, they have to stop saying it, right? They return to Islam by saying the shahadatain, the two shahadas. They've resolved to never do that action again. They ask Allah for forgiveness, and that's their tawbah. And inshallah, they're Muslim again. Okay? And make up whatever religious obligations he missed in the interim, like obligatory prayers. So a person who has left Islam, is in a limbo state. What is this limbo state? They're not Muslim, right? But because they were previously Muslim as an adult, it is still obligatory upon them to make up anything they missed during that period. Okay? So for example, someone left Islam, let's say for a month. Okay? During that month, all the prayers they didn't pray during that month, all the fast they didn't fast if it was in Ramadan, for example, any zakah they owed that they didn't pay, right? All of that has to be made up. Okay? So even though they're technically not Muslim, right? All these things still are still being counted against them. They have to still do it. Okay? They have to still do it. This is in contrast to someone who was born not Muslim and becomes Muslim. Once they become Muslim, they don't have to make up any fast they missed. They don't have to make up any prayers they missed while they were not Muslim. They don't have to make up any zakah they missed while they were not Muslim. But this person who was Muslim and apostated, they have to do all this. Okay, they have to do all this. So if they were Muslim they left Islam for, let's say, a period of years, all those fasts and prayers and zakah they missed, they have to make it all up. Okay, and inshallah, this kind of person, after they come back to Islam, they just try their best, right? They try their best. they systematically approach it, chipping away at whatever prayers they have to make up, a little at a time. Whatever fast they have to make up, they chip away at it a little at a time. Whatever zakat they have to pay, they chip away at it a little at a time. They go about it systematically with sincerity, and inshallah, Allah will make it easy for them. All right. And even if, if Allah Ta'ala cuts their lifespan shorter than they expected, Allah is merciful, inshallah. They took a systematic approach to making these things, and they'll meet their Lord, right? Inshallah, in a state that will inshallah be good for them, because He guided them back to Islam. And so long as Allah guided them back to Islam and wanted good for them and wanted them to follow the Prophet ﷺ, these are all good signs that inshallah they'll be okay. It says, if he does not repent, i.e. if he does not recant his disbelief with the two testifications of faith, he is asked to repent, i.e. he is ordered to return to Islam through the two testifications. So this person, okay, if someone leaves Islam and they don't immediately say back to say the Shahadatain, what's obligatory? It's obligatory for the Muslims to call them back to Islam, right? So for example, in our context, right, the Muslims, right, just like how we'd call anyone back to Islam, whether they're born Muslim or born non-Muslim or anything, we call them back to Islam. We try to see why they became non-Muslim, whether it was a misconception they had or a mistake they made. We help them, try to guide them back to Islam. If the person's in a Muslim country, then it falls into the responsibility of the judges as well to call them back to Islam. Okay, to call them back to Islam and to ask them to repent. He says nothing is accepted from him except Islam or execution. The Caliph executes him according to the conditions mentioned in the longer books of fiqh, the longer, more detailed books of fiqh. So this is something that doesn't really apply to us in this context. But in the context where if the person was to become non-Muslim, they leave Islam under a proper Muslim government, okay? Then the leader of the Muslim government in that time and place, after he commands him to come back to Islam, if that person desists, okay, they desist, then that leader has to enact capital punishment on them, take their life. Now, the scholars differ as to how long they're given to repent. Some say immediately, some say a few days, some say a few months, some say even forever. Okay? So there's a difference of opinions about how long exactly to give that person to repent. Okay, to give that person to repent. But in our context, this doesn't apply to us. In our context, if someone does leave Islam, what we should do is we should approach that person with love. We should approach that person, with warmth and mercy, to call them back to Islam. Most of these people who leave Islam, if they were born Muslim or if they became Muslim and left Islam, a lot of times they leave Islam because of a bad experience they had. Okay, they had a bad experience with Muslims. They had a bad experience with, in a masjid or something associated with Islam. Okay, maybe a spouse, maybe a parent or something. And that bad experience was enough to push them over into a world of disbelief. And so a lot of times there's just emotional pain. Okay, emotional pain. And so addressing that as a community is important. It's good. Some people have, actual theological beliefs, like they've gone through arguments in their mind that led them to become not Muslim. These types of people also should be helped. Because in the rational context of things, like if you were to approach things rationally, Islam makes 100% sense, right? Maybe they just never met someone who can show them that. And so in any case, however it is they left Islam, people should be shown, people should be helped and brought to Islam and guided away from their mistakes, okay? Away from their mistakes. Taib, he says, the second thing he says is, وَيَبْطُلُ بِهَا صَوْمُهُ وَتَيَمُّمُهُ وَنِكَاحُهُ قبل الدخول وكذا بعده إن لم يعد إلى الإسلام في العدة ولا يصح عقد نكاحه وتحرم ذبيحته ولا يرث. He says amongst the consequences as well are that, number one, apostasy removes that person's good deeds. Okay. Number two, it invalidates their fast. So if they were fasting the day of their apostasy, that fast is invalid. It doesn't count anymore. Okay. As well as a tayammum. If he had tayammum that day, right? If he had tayammum that day, then his tayammum is invalid. Okay. Apostasy takes place before consummation, invalidates the marriage. So if they were married, let's say a Muslim man and a Muslim woman were married, before consummation, before they actually consummated the marriage, if one of them apostates, the marriage is dissolved. Okay, the marriage is dissolved. After consummation, it invalidates the marriage if he does not return to Islam during the waiting period. So if they consummated their marriage, a Muslim man and a Muslim woman, they consummated their marriage. One of them leaves Islam. They enter what's called a waiting period. Okay, a waiting period, which depends on, it's either 3 menstrual cycles or 3 months, depending on the state of the woman. Okay, طيب. During that period of time, that waiting period, if the person who left Islam doesn't come back to Islam, the marriage is dissolved. So let's say, for example, the man left Islam, the husband, right? The woman enters her waiting period. If he does not return to Islam during her waiting period, the marriage is dissolved. Meaning that if he does want, let's say he becomes Muslim again after that waiting period, okay, they have to marry again, a whole new marriage, a whole nikah, new mahar, new witnesses, new everything, okay? If he comes back to Islam within that waiting period, the marriage continues as normal, as if nothing happened. If he doesn't come back to Islam during the waiting period, khalas, she's free to marry whoever she wants. Even if he comes back to Islam later on, khalas, she's with her new husband, okay? Likewise, vice versa. If she, for example, left Islam, there's the waiting period, okay? Now, if she returns to Islam during that waiting period, the marriage resumes. Otherwise, right, she's lost, the marriage is no longer valid, it's dissolved, and she's no longer considered married. He says as well, it is not valid for him to contract a new marriage, not even to an apostate like him. So if he apostatizes, according to our Sharia, he cannot remarry. Not even to another apostate, okay? Not even to another apostate. Whatever an apostate slaughters is unlawful to consume and is considered to be najas or filth. So whatever he slaughters, if they slaughter a goat, a chicken, a cow, a camel, whatever, that meat is unlawful for Muslims to eat. It's considered like the same ruling as a corpse. If you were to find roadkill, for example, or a corpse on the ground, you cannot eat what an apostate slaughters. Number 6, he does not inherit from others. If, for example, someone apostates, right? They leave Islam. If, for example, their father passes away, who was Muslim, right? They don't inherit anything from their father, khalas, okay, because they've left Islam. Nor do they leave wealth for others to inherit. If they were to pass away, tamam, if they were to pass away, there's no wealth left for, their wealth isn't given to their inheritors. So their children, for example, if this man left Islam and their children are still believers, khalas, the wealth doesn't trickle down to the children after he passes away. He says he does not pass an inheritance to others. He is not preyed upon. Tamam. So the person who commits apostasy or ridda is not preyed upon. There's no salat al-janazah for them. He is not washed. It is not obligatory for the Muslims to wash him. It is also not obligatory for the Muslims to shroud him. Okay? He is not shrouded. 11, he is not buried, i.e., it is not obligatory for the Muslims to bury him. Okay, yes. Shrouded means, so you know how like in America they put the deceased in coffins and then they bury the coffin? So Muslims, they shroud the deceased person in cloth and then bury them while they're covered in cloth. Okay? Alhamdulillah. He is not buried, i.e., it's not obligatory for the Muslims to bury him. In fact, it is unlawful for them to bury him with other Muslims. So if they want to bury him, they can't bury him with other Muslims because he's left Islam now, okay? His wealth after his death is tribute, i.e. for Muslim welfare. Any wealth he leaves behind after he passes away is given to the Muslim, what's in the welfare of the believers. So for example, if it were in the case of a Muslim government, they would take it and they would spend it on roads, hospitals, schools, general things that benefit society, okay? It's not given to their inheritors, to the heirs, okay? Number 14, he spends eternity in perpetual torture if he dies an apostate, just like others who die as non-Muslims. If he left Islam and he passed away in that state, then he dies as a disbeliever, and their state is well known. Their state is well known. Okay? Yes. No, it was not. ولا يورث ولا يصلى عليه ولا يغسل ولا يكفن ولا يدفن ويحرم دفنه في مدافن المسلمين وماله فيء. نعم. Okay. So the next fasl, tamam. The next fasl, he's talking about what is responsible for all individuals. He says, every responsible individual is required to perform everything that Allah has made obligatory upon him. He is required to perform them as Allah has commanded him to perform them. included bringing their essential elements and conditions and avoiding their invalidators. He is required to command whomever he sees omitting one of them, i.e., essential elements or conditions, or performing them in an improper manner. He commands them to perform them in the proper manner. He is required to force them to do that if he is able to force them. Otherwise, he is required to object to it in his heart if he is not able to compel an order. And this is the weakest of faith, i.e., the least an individual is responsible for when unable. He is required to abandon everything that is unlawful, to forbid whoever commits them, and to prevent them from engaging in them by force if able to do so. Otherwise, he is required to object to that in his heart and leave this place of sin. Unlawful, haram, is whatever Allah has threatened with punishment to whoever perpetrates it, and promised rewards for whoever abandons it. Its opposite is called obligatory or wajib. So, every responsible individual, responsible here means what? Legally responsible. So they're Muslim, and they're an adult, and they are of sound mind, right? Mukallaf, right? We covered mukallaf, what it means in the beginning, right? They're Muslim, they're an adult, and they're of sound mind. Every legally responsible individual is required to perform everything that Allah has made obligatory upon him. So every single individual, if something is obligatory upon them by Allah Ta'ala, they have to do it. Praying 5 times a day, every Muslim has to do that. Fasting in Ramadan, every Muslim has to do that as long as their health permits them to do so. Okay? Paying zakah if they have the will to pay zakah. Making hajj if they have the means to make hajj. Okay? Being a good Muslim to their brothers and sisters. Being a good son to their father and mother. Being a good spouse to their spouse. Being a good father to their children. Being a good neighbor. Being a good member of society. Having a pure heart free of traits like hatred, jealousy, right? All these are things, some of the things that every Muslim is obligated to do. Every Muslim is obligated to stay away from adultery, stay away from stealing, staying away from murder, staying away from oppressing others, staying away from, even like harming animals unnecessarily. So every Muslim, every responsible individual, so every Muslim who is an adult and of sound mind, has to perform everything Allah has been obligatory upon them, and furthermore must stay away from everything Allah has made impermissible for them. Okay? If they don't do that, then they have to make tawbah. If they don't do that, they have to make tawbah. And we said tawbah, how do you make tawbah? You stop doing whatever you were doing, and then you ask Allah for forgiveness, and you make an intention to never do it again. Okay? Now, if you slip into it again by accident, khalas, that's okay, you make a new tawbah. All right? But you intend in your heart to never do it again. So, for example, someone, led a life of oppressing others, right? Maybe they're a bully or something, okay? Or a thug, or someone like someone, part of who just harm people on the streets. This person, right? They stop doing what they're doing. They stop being a bully. They stop harming others in the streets, right? They ask Allah for forgiveness. And what else do they do? They make a firm intention, a firm resolve to never go back to that lifestyle. And that's their tawbah, okay? And if they slip into mistakes and end up going back to it, they should make a new one over and over and over again like that, okay? He is required to perform them as Allah has commanded him to perform them, including bringing their essential elements and conditions and avoiding their invalidators. So he says, whatever else Allah has made obligatory upon you, you have to do it like the way Allah has told you to do them. So Allah made praying obligatory upon everyone. Okay? You have to pray the way Allah wants you to pray. The way the Prophet told you how to pray, you have to pray like that, which means you have to do the proper conditions. You have to pray with wudu, you have to pray wearing clothes, you have to pray facing the qibla, praying fast, standing up the way if you're able to. And we'll cover all this in detail, inshallah, right? So you have to pray the proper way, for example. Perform the action the proper way by doing what he says, doing the essential elements and conditions, and avoiding the invalidators. So, for example, prayer has essential elements, right? Such as standing, reading the Fatiha, doing ruku', doing sajda, doing salams, right? And everything will come in detail. We'll cover it, inshallah, okay? And it has conditions, and it has things that invalidate it. What invalidates your prayer? Talking while you're praying, okay? Eating while you're praying, drinking while you're praying, making too many movements while you're praying, for example. All these things invalidate your prayer. So everything that's obligatory upon you to do, you have to do it the right way. The right conditions, the right integrals or elements, and without doing any of the invalidating actions, okay? He is required to command whomever he sees omitting one of them, tamam, or performing them in an improper manner, to perform them in the proper manner. What he's saying here is that if he sees someone doing something wrong, either not praying at all or praying incorrectly, for example, not paying zakah at all, paying it incorrectly, for example, right? This person, what does he have to do? He is required to force them to do that if he is able to. So he has to make them do it properly. If he is able to. What does that mean if he is able to? That means, for example, you have some sort of influence on that person, like some sort of like a relationship with them where you can make them do something. Like who? Like a parent and a child, right? Mom and dad can make a child do something. Okay? They have that right. They have that relationship, right? Okay? Or for example, in the case of like, again, if we're living in a Muslim country, like the judge or the leader with the people, they have a right to tell them what to do and they have to listen. Okay? But in other cases, between peers, community members, right? Brothers and sisters, there's no formal relationship where one can force someone to do something. Okay? Where one can force someone to do something. In which case, what do? Otherwise, he's required to object to it in his heart if he is not able to compel an order. And this is the weakest of faith. The least an individual is responsible for when able. So essentially, you have three categories. The first category is if you're actually able to force someone to do something that they're neglecting. And again, that's only in cases where a relationship like that exists. Either a legal relationship, like for example, like we said, like the governor of the land and the people, the judge of the land and the people, or like a parent and a child. Okay, a parent and a child, for example. Okay, all right. But otherwise, if that sort of relationship doesn't exist, there's no forcing. You can't force someone to do anything, right? So what do? Number 2, which is what? To give counsel. Tell them, teach them, right? Use beautiful words, be smooth in how you do it. Do it in a way where you'll get the point across. It doesn't always require a class. It doesn't always require, preaching. It doesn't require being hard. It just requires saying the right thing in a wise way, in a beautiful way, and the point gets across, right? You see someone, right? For example, right? Not praying, right? Instead of coming down on them, why aren't you praying? Don't you know you have to pray? If you don't pray, you're going to go to hell. This is really bad for you. Every Muslim has to pray, for example, right? Okay, how will they react to that? Yeah, probably not well. Or you just go to them and you say to them, you say something else to them, right? For example, inviting them to pray with you, okay? Or just saying to them, right? Wouldn't it just be nice to pray with us right now? Just something else, right? Something else. Be smart about how you approach it, and you can have a much more, an exponentially more positive result. You can have an exponentially more positive result, okay? That's the second category. Third category, right, is if you can't do any of that, right? You can't force them. You can't even speak to them. Sometimes speaking to someone might make things worse, right? Sometimes you might not be equipped to speak to them. Maybe you just are not eloquent. Maybe you're not articulate. Maybe that person you just know they're not going to listen to you, or it might make things worse, whatever it might be, right? The third category, the third thing you should do is, at very least, just test that action in your heart and pray for them. In your heart, you say, it's not good that person isn't praying. I'm going to make dua for them. It's not good that person is oppressing others. I'm going to make dua for them. And that's the minimum you should do, right? That is the minimum you should do. That's something you can do with anyone, no matter who it is. Whether it's a peer, whether it's a family member, whether it's someone older than you, younger than you, doesn't matter. You can do it to anyone. Then he says he's required to abandon everything that is unlawful. So if you're a Muslim who's legally responsible, you have to leave anything that's unlawful or impermissible or haram. To forbid whoever commits them and to prevent them from engaging in them by force if able to do so. Otherwise, he's required to object to that in his heart and leave the place of sin. So like we said, right, just like what's obligatory, right? If they're doing something haram, the first step, if you're able to, force them to stop. But again, that's not always an option, right? Number 2, otherwise tell them, teach them, counsel them. Number 3, if you can't do that, detest it in your heart and make dua for them, okay? Now, some people think that it's okay for certain people to do things that are haram, like children, right? If they see children doing something haram, it's okay, they're kids, right? They're not responsible yet. They're not legally responsible yet. The pens aren't writing, their sins aren't being written. Well, whoever witnesses even a child doing something haram, you have to stop them. You have to counsel them. You have to test it in your heart and pray for them. Why? Because even though the child isn't being sinful, the action they're doing is disliked by Allah. So if someone sees a child, for example, vandalizing, right? Destroying someone's property, right? Stealing, okay? Harming others, right? Not praying, for example, right? If they're old enough, yani, tamam. This person should teach the child, okay? If it's their own child, you can actually make them stop. You know what I mean? You can actually make them stop. So even if someone is not being sinful by performing that thing, okay? By performing that thing, like a child, right? The action that they're doing, that's the test by Allah Ta'ala, should be stopped. Their action they're doing, which is the test by Allah Ta'ala, should be stopped. The last thing he says is, unlawful, haram is whatever Allah has threatened with punishment to whoever perpetrates it, and promised rewards for whoever abandons it. So haram means what? If you do it, you're sinful. If you don't do it, you get rewarded. And obligatory, the opposite of haram, means what? If you do it, you're rewarded. If you don't do it, you're sinful. Okay? There are some cases where doing commanding the good, like in forbidding the evil, right, is also excused. Okay? Commanding the good, yani telling people to do something obligatory. Forbidding the evil, yani telling them to not do something haram. It's excused. You're excused from doing that in cases where your life is in danger, in cases where your wealth is in danger, in cases where your limbs are in danger, in cases where, like, your honor is in danger. Your honor meaning, like, if you were to do it, you might get assaulted sexually, for example. Okay? In these cases, right, you're excused from commanding the good or forbidding the evil. If you know, for example, if you were to say something to this person, right, they're gonna hit you, right? Or they'll hit your son or your parents, or they'll do something to your wife, or they'll do something to your property, to your house, right? In these cases, you're excused. You don't have to approach them in that way. Just dislike it in your heart and make dua for them. Okay, dislike it in your heart and make dua for them. Are there any questions? Yeah. Specifically referring only to the halal within the rules in terms of he's asking, this section refers to the halal irresponsibility to admonish and encourage regarding to halal and haram. No, it's referring specifically to what's obligatory and what's not obligatory. So halal can mean even things that are not obligatory, right? It's halal to drink water. You don't have to drink water, right? It's halal to eat this, like, go have, meal with your friends, but you don't have to eat it with your friends. Prohibited. So it's obligatory for you to encourage others to do what's obligatory if they're neglecting it. And it's obligatory for you to discourage others from doing what's haram. Okay? So for example, it's not obligatory for anything to encourage about it's not obligatory. For example, that was disliked. So when it comes to things that are like sunnah, it's sunnah to encourage others to do sunnah, right? And it's sunnah to discourage others from doing makruh. The person doing so is required to have the basic knowledge around that which they are encouraging. What do you mean? So, for example, like, okay, I know someone's not praying. Okay, I know that that's not the issue. But let's say, for example, I don't know the arkan of salat. Then I'm not in a position to tell the person about their salat. It's asking you, do you have to know the details of a specific act to encourage someone to do it? If you know, for example, praying is obligatory, but you don't know the details of praying, can you encourage others to pray? Yeah, you can.
and then I talked to them for a few minutes, and I know very well that they don't know the arcane of prayer. I know that.
Okay.
So in the first place, they didn't know the arcane of salah, and they're telling someone what their prayer is about.
So what are you asking?
Does the person have required in such a situation to know, basically know what they're talking about, have been through, if they're gonna do something like that, like if obviously if you were to see myself or someone make a mistake, it invalidates the prayer, then you know why, you know the information as to why that they mixed a particular rukn prayer, for example. Right?
So you're asking, do you have to know the details of an action before you can give someone counsel regarding it? I mean, you have to know about the action, yes, right? But in cases like the one you mentioned, where people might come to yourself, for example, and tell you do something wrong, and then you would speak to them, and you come to realize that they don't know what they're talking about. There could be a many different reasons. Maybe they follow a different madhab. Maybe like they misunderstood something you did. I just give them the benefit of the doubt and just let it go. Yeah. Okay. Who knows? Sometimes someone tells you you're doing something wrong, and you're actually not. But it's a good reminder from Allah. Is it related to what we're talking about?
It's in the section.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So previous in marriage and apostasy inside of marriage before consummation. I guess there's two questions. Never came to this before, but so the first question is: do the schools differ on this point? Like,
I haven't memorized difference of opinion on this. There could be, I'm not sure.
So the thing that came to my heart, I'm wondering about that, I don't know what the Shafi'i Fiqh about Al-Kitab.
Yeah.
So I guess it wouldn't really apply. I'm assuming it doesn't really apply in this case. For example, if a woman became Christian.
Well, Lord, I haven't memorized it. I don't know the difference of opinion on this. I have to look it up. Yeah. Okay. Any last questions? تفضل. Yeah.
And so this is after I'm assuming they tried to convince them, and then because is execution a high they don't go, like, for example, after you mentioned that, then you mentioned that it doesn't apply to the stage, and so the best thing we can do is give counsel. Takes time.
Yeah.
Maybe misunderstandings, or maybe they had a bad experience. Would that have been the same for in the past also?
It could have been. He's asking, could it also have been in the past, like the principles we mentioned today about calling them back to Islam, could it apply in the past as well? You're saying that, right? Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, right? What you want is people to enter Islam, right? What we want is people to enter Islam, and in any case, no matter what time, place, era it is, right? If someone is not Muslim, people of Allah are going to exert their efforts in making them become Muslim again. Making them become Muslim again. And if someone, for example, has left Islam, and it's clear that it might have been from some sort of like bad experience or like misconception or something like that, right? And it's clear, right, that with time they'll come back to Islam. The people of God would try their best to bring them back to Islam. Because like we said, the scholars differ on how long, right, that period is where they're being, encouraged to come back to Islam. Okay? So they can give them some time. Yeah.